So yeah, everybody say hello in the chat where you're from. It's always good to get a vibe where everybody's from. So for those of you that come every month, I do a little quick intro at the start for the benefit of people who have never been to one of our events before and give a couple updates on what we're up to over at Beta. So welcome everyone to How We Listen Live, the knowledge to move your music forward. And the agenda for today is about Beta, this is what I'm doing now, about how we listen, so everybody understands what these events are about and where How We Listen comes from. A couple announcements as normal, and then a conversation with May Mahmoudi from Big Dada Ninja Tune. So for you all who don't know, I'm Mark Brown. I'm the founder and CEO of Beta. This is a Canadian accent. I lived in the UK. Now I live in Stockholm, Sweden. As I do every time, I always explain what my background is because I think it helps people understand the perspective I take and the questions I ask, and it's good for people to have a bit of context. So I worked at a small indie label, pre-internet, mid-90s in Canada. Then I moved to the UK. I worked at Creation Records, one of the most important indie labels in UK music history, I'd say. Definitely one of the biggest in the 90s. Then I worked at a smaller label after that, where I started doing radio promotion. So trying to get songs on the radio. Radio used to be a big thing in the UK. I guess it's still a big thing. And then I started my own radio and TV promotion company, which I did for years before I started Beta and before I moved to Sweden. So what is Beta for people who don't know? It's the platform that enables sending and receiving of digital audio in a clean, simple, and secure way. And it's built for everyone working with music today. And what does that mean? Simply put, fast and secure audio sharing. It's what people do every day, send and receive digital audio. And that's what Beta is for. But how is Beta different? We take advantage of audiophiles' unique properties, of which there are 3. So we read and write file metadata, including WAV files. So that's the information that lives in your files. We convert file formats on the fly. So you can upload one file format, share in another. And we have fast yet secure streaming, meaning you can't rip our links, which is super important from a security point of view. And our mission statement as a company is to provide artists and their teams with the tools and the knowledge to move their careers forward. So how do we do that? Well, Beta is simple. That's the tool part. And then how we listen is the knowledge part. And so what is how we listen? It started out as an interview series, just 10, I think it's about 10 or 12 questions. We do it every week. And it's published on our blog. And it's where we just interview people about how they find, discover, listen, and experience music, and especially new music. And this came out of the fact that a couple of years ago, maybe three years ago, there was a lot of articles about basically, and we're going to talk about this a little later with May, but this idea that you just throw your music up onto Spotify and the algorithm picks it up, or you get on a playlist at Apple or a Deezer, and then that's all you need to do. That's just how music becomes popular. And we all know that that's not the case. And we wanted to highlight the fact that there's loads of ways that people find and experience and discover new music. And so what I like to do at these events is I like to sort of highlight some of the interesting interviews that come through and just how people maybe find music in a different way or experience it in a different way to help everybody listening maybe get an idea of what people are doing when they're actually listening to your music. And so, Tristra, I thought this was pretty interesting. They say, I usually take several walks a day with my extremely energetic dog, and I run and work out to music. that connection between movement and music is, for me, the source of all joy and means to achieve greater listening focus and music appreciation. And this is something I would have never thought of, but then I was on a panel about a year ago, and there was a person who was talking about their job was placing music on playlists in gyms. And I just never, so it's really about BPM and all that kind of stuff. And I just never thought of it before. So when I read this quote, I thought, oh, this totally makes sense. And then another series we run is called Method to My Music. And this is more for artists and producers. It runs weekly for artists and producers to talk about how they do things and, you know, the recording process. And so International Show, which is, of course, the best name ever, says this: when I'm collaborating with other artists, either doing features or co-releases, I'm intentional about developing the cadence first. Then I build out the ad libs. Then I move to the lyric development based on the style of the song it was intended to be. And so this shows that iterating process back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But what I thought was interesting is that later on in his interview, he mentions how he only has a small group of people that he lets hear the music first. And so this is a problem that I see all the time. Artists need to hold their music back because they're worried about too many people hearing it before it's completed and released. And I've highlighted quotes like this previously where people have just sort of passed it from one person to another, and then suddenly it ends up in places it shouldn't do before it's ready. And then the other series we run is called Digital Dialogue, where we get someone to take more of a deep dive into something that they're most knowledgeable about. And this is a new series that's probably been running for just under a year. And the most recent one is Dan from, I can never say this, Kubatz, which is a lossless, high-quality streaming platform. And so Dan says, by recognizing and encouraging niche streaming services, the music industry will continue to find areas of growth. It's clear that a great many consumers are curious to hear more than just what's happening in the mainstream. And the reason I think this is interesting and that this is really good timing is May and I have already talked about this, how the world would benefit from many different options, just not Spotify, Apple Music, and all that kind of stuff. And this has come up in other conversations elsewhere. So I think Dan's quote makes complete sense. Jamie will throw a link in the chat, so if you want to read it for yourself. So how we listen live, the reason everybody's here today, what is it and why do we do it? Well, basically, we wanted to take more of a deep dive into a certain subject. It's much better talking in person. It's super fun to get together every month and have a conversation and just see where it takes us. And that's essentially why we do it. Before we go on, I just want to highlight the fact that everybody who participates in these events, they do it for free. So we always throw a little money to an organization in London in the UK called Maytree. It's very important to us. It should be important to everyone else. So take a screenshot, look it up. Mental health is super important no matter what you do or where you live. So just wanted to highlight that. My own site, if you ever wanted to get a hold of me, visnomics.com. You can hit me up on, I don't use Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, hit my emails there. You can read links to my blog posts and stuff. If you ever want to get a hold of me, want to know anything, have any questions, I'm happy to connect with anyone, especially on LinkedIn. We have a Facebook group if you like to get your info that way. Just look for Beta How We Listen. We post there about upcoming events and all that kind of stuff. YouTube channel. So don't forget the way it works. You sign up to an event, no matter if you come or not, you get a listen again link right away. Then we edit the video for sort of clarity, and it goes up on YouTube. And then after that, it goes up on all the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, you name it, they're all there. So no matter how you want to digest this podcast, you can find it somewhere. Another thing we just announced, I don't know if you all know about Music Brains, but my man Robert over there did a collaboration with Jamie and Colin from our team called Metadata Matters. They're writing 3 articles. The first one was released last week, I believe. And we love talking about metadata, and they're massive metadata nerds. So check out those articles. Jamie will throw the first one in the chat. And then, as usual, always like to announce the next event. And it'll be with Andy Connors, who basically has the longest job title ever. So he's the head of metal, punk, new age, and I had to cut out a couple more genres that he's in charge of. And he's also the senior manager of catalog and creator services at Pandora. And for people who don't, outside of the US, who don't know what Pandora is, it's a streaming platform. But you should all come anyway, because there's lots of things that can be done with Pandora, even if you don't live in the US, which is what we've figured out from talking to Andy. So that's all I've got. And I'm going to look for May. They've got a background that is pretty recognizable. Oh, there it is. The perfect complement to my background. Yeah. How's it going?
Good.
Where are you?
How are you?
Good.
Sorry.
Good. Where are you?
I'm based in Los Angeles.
But tell us about this background then.
Oh, well, the background is this mountain range in Iran that I really like.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's very beautiful. People never come with nice background. So I'm very, very impressed.
Yeah, this is my go-to meeting background.
So why don't we talk about your background quickly? Because everybody loves hearing how. Oh, first off, maybe you should say what you do, because you wear many hats, I believe. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as do many people in the music industry nowadays, I feel like. But yeah, I work at Ninja Tune. I started out on the publishing side, working in sync, and I still do that in addition to doing A&R on the label side for the Ninja Tune sub-label Big Dada.
Okay.
And I also make music and DJ under my artist moniker Maral.
But where did you start? So you're in LA. So like, where did you start out? How did you end up? Did you grow up in LA or what?
No, I grew up in Northern Virginia near Washington, D.C.
Okay.
I didn't go to school for music or anything. So I was just a huge music fan. I always say that I started out as like a listener. I was a big listener, a big digger of music, just studying music history, studying different labels, just like using Wikipedia when I was younger. And then in college, I didn't study music, but I was part of like a great music scene in Virginia Tech, which is usually like a, sports oriented school. So we kind of had to create our own music scene there. And it was very tiny, but it ended up leading to bands like Wild Nothing. Members of like Beach Fossils were a part of this music scene. So it was like a really cool scene to, that was just like a couple of people, but it ended up leading to like bigger things. And I think it was great to have that kind of incubation period in a smaller scene for all of our music. And then after college, I stayed in Virginia for like 2 more years. And then I moved out to LA with like 15 of my friends, and everyone does stuff in music in different ways. And
how did you coordinate that? That's like moving en masse like that is pretty interesting.
It was due to the fact that one of our friends got into pop songwriting, and he had some success in that. And then our friends kind of started revolving around that success and building out from there. So a lot of my friends do pop songwriting, pop production, and pop management. So my friend has a management company and now a publishing company. So that's kind of what they focused on and how they grew. And the ability for everyone to move out was kind of due to that success.
but pop's not like Beach Fossils. That new single's really good, but Beach Fossils is pop in a way that I'm assuming is not the pop you're talking about. So is that not your thing? Like, what was your vibe?
Yeah, I definitely was not interested in being a part of the pop scene, although I think what my friends did was like really amazing. But just even coming to LA and seeing what it was like, I was like, oh, this is not the place for me. So let me try to figure out my own path. So I kind of went the indie route, I went the underground route. For my own music, I started just DJing and playing shows at like warehouse raves and underground venues in LA, and just linking up with a cool group of experimental artists here that were really helpful in giving me space to do my thing and grow. And at the same time, I did have to, I had odd jobs like working at a psychology office, dog walker, until I got a job at Universal Music Publishing, just to get a job in music in the copyright and royalty department.
Yeah.
So I worked there for like 3.5 years until I got the job at Ninja Tune. But it was because of all these other things I was doing on the side that I was able to kind of continue growing while still working a job that wasn't really related to the space that I wanted to be in, which is more of an indie space, while Universal is more of a major label space.
Like the major label, the
Yeah.
archetype the archetype major label. And then, so how did you jump from Universal to Ninja Big Dada?
So yeah, I had been looking since the beginning, because I didn't really feel good at Universal. I thought Universal was great, but I just, again, not my people, not my vibe. So I was like looking for a job the whole time. And then I found a sync assistant job at Ninja Tune, and I applied, and just without knowing anyone in Ninja Tune, which is, very hard to get a job in music without knowing someone. So I like looked up who the sync person was, and I emailed him directly and got a meeting set up, and was able to like get through several rounds of meetings and got the job, luckily. And I heard that there were like 200, 300 plus people applying for this job. And it was like,
Really? Wow.
yeah, it was like I had, I had a lot of friends who were like, yeah, I applied for that job, I didn't get it or whatever. But like someone is saying in the comments, I really built my resume by just doing things. Like I was managing my friends' bands, I was DJing, I had a club night, I had like a lot of different things that I was just doing on my own that would add to like me understanding things. And then at the same time at Universal, I learned a lot of back-end stuff like publishing, copyright, royalties. So just like gaining as much knowledge and not feeling like I'm too cool to like know the back-end nerdy stuff of music. You know what I mean? Like I really studied, basically.
And then so how much time did you spend on the publishing side before you went to the record side?
So then when I moved on to Ninja Tune, I just started at Big Dada 3 years ago, and I've been there 5 years. So yeah, I worked for like 2.5 years, almost 3 years on the publishing side. Again, just kind of paying my dues. And then I was able to move on to the label side and do A&R.
So then, though, like, because what I think is super interesting is like those are two different worlds, are they not? Or like two sides of the same coin. So
yeah,
summarize the difference between records and publishing in the sense,
Yeah,
like, how do each of them function?
yeah, they're very different. On the publishing side, you're focusing more on things like sessions, sync placements, signing artists that fit those two categories, and just kind of like admin, like a lot of just like making sure everything is being paid out correctly. And so it's more just kind of on the A&R side, it's more connecting people for sessions, and kind of can be kind of really creative in that sense, but it is just more on the back end side of things. You're not working directly on like releases, which is what you would do on the label side, is like you sign the artist and then you work with them throughout the whole release.
And then record side,
Yes,
That's
so
just the traditional release and records type thing?
yeah, well, on the A&R side, it is finding the artist, making sure they fit the criterias that you need as a label, but at the same time, making sure that you are the right label for them and you're able to provide the right resources. And then, yeah, the artist campaign. And, also if you're working with an artist that doesn't have an album done yet, you're doing kind of the same type of A&R that you do on the publishing side. Again, connecting them with producers, making sure that they are creating the best music that they can.
Working on the publishing side, did you find that a lot of artists, like I think sort of intuitively, I would say that an artist would have a better idea of how to release a record than to deal with the publishing side? Did you find that artists were G'd up about the publishing side? Because I even find it complicated still in a way.
Well, the admin side is really complicated, and I think that's what artists need the most help with. But actually, in terms of connecting with other artists and doing sessions and stuff, sometimes in the end, it's better when it's just artist to artist. It's like authentically their community, who they're already talking to, playing shows with. That I think artists can sometimes be the best A&Rs for themselves,
Yeah, well, you were mentioning one of the artists you work with just did something with Beck, and that just came to get, you said it came together organically, right? Like there was no,
we were
my
just
people talk to your
about,
people.
yeah, we were just talking about how it would be great if one of the tracks on the album had a feature. And she was like, oh, I know Beck. And I was like, oh, just DM Beck, text Beck. And she texted Beck and it just happened. It's like, that's so much better than us having to go through the label or the managers. Like it wouldn't have happened if it was through that.
Yeah. Well, when I did radio promotion, I always thought like it's way better when the artist goes to the DJ themselves instead. Like, people supporting artists can only cause trouble in some ways.
Yeah, I
so
think
like
same applies to press too. I think press really likes it when the artist hits them up directly.
Yeah, especially at the start. Like it's I always tried to stay out of the way as much as possible. So like tell me about what you're doing these days then on the label side. How do you spend most of your time, would you say? Like, or how does your day break down?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still doing publishing sync stuff, so that is still part of my job as well. I like support the sync team and I help with like US publishing A&R as well. But on the label side, I'm also working on it's like, I split up my days between both. On the label side, it requires a lot of meetings with the UK staff, because everyone from Big Dada is actually based in the UK, basically. Only one other member is in the US. So yeah, waking up early in the morning and having those meetings. And then at the same time, keeping in touch with all of our artists that we've already signed, making sure that, either they're working on music or we're in campaign, and making sure they're feeling good about everything, making sure they're aware of all the things we need from them. We're always needing things from artists, right? So just keeping tabs on all that stuff. And then at the same time, talking to artists that we potentially want to sign, and also researching to see if there's anyone we should be talking to that we're not already talking to.
So like, let's take A&R as in like going and looking for new artists to sign. And let's talk about like comparing, like looking for artists for records and then looking for publishing. Like you started doing publishing, so what would you be looking for? This is such a vague question, but like what would you be looking for in an artist when you're trying to sign them for publishing? What are the things that are most attractive or that you need to have, maybe?
I think it depends on what kind of publishing company, like what is the focus of the publishing company. At Justice in Music, we have such a strong sync team. So I feel like a lot of our signings revolve around sync, how syncable the artist is, and how, past syncs, like what is their potential within that realm. But at the same time, we are expanding and looking at great songwriters, great producers, and trying to bring both of those worlds together. So yeah, I think for publishing, it's more about not, I mean, we do sign artists as well. So like we'll sign like an artist that's doing really well, and it would be beneficial to work with them on the publishing side as well. Or even a lot of time when we have artists signed on the master side, the label side, we'll sign them on the publishing side. So it's an easy thing to have that. And then when you go to pitch for sync, it's all easy clearable. That's a big benefit to the clients. So I think really it is about more what and how they fit into the songwriting world and also the sync world. So they could be just like a producer without any cuts themselves, but they are actually a great producer in making sync friendly tracks, or they're a great producer in working with other artists.
So like this is like a chicken and egg thing. Like how do you find, like, how do new artists get syncs? Like, because when we chatted last week or whatever, we were talking about how a lot of artists need to do loads of stuff themselves, and that makes complete sense. Like, you really, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but like, how would an artist be trying to get syncs if they don't know anything about the sync world and they don't have the support of a publisher? You must get that question all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, like you're saying, a chicken and egg situation. Sometimes artists will make music that's so syncable that the music supervisor will just find it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or it's like, yeah, a lot of time I have friends who are artists who just through releasing their music and playing shows, they get onto the radar of music supervisors. So there's different ways to, you know, get your music in front of music supervisors. But of course, you have to kind of live in Los Angeles or New York City or these main hubs to get to like physically be able to like play a show for a music supervisor. But yeah, I think a lot of it, you need to have a publisher or sync agency to pitch your music in order to get into the system.
So, and like, so something that would be syncable is that based on making music, and this is never a good idea, making music that follows other music that's popular. But is that the deal that you find? It's a lot of the time it fits the vibe of what else is being synced? Do you think?
Yeah, but that's just something I find kind of disappointing about music in general, is like, you know, besides the business side of publishing A&R, yeah, that's great. Find artists that fit into these briefs that you are looking for, because you need to have that catalog as like a main publisher. But I don't think we should be promoting that type of mindset of like, you need to make music that sounds like what's on TV in order to get opportunities. I think music supervisors don't want that either, but it is, of course, an avenue to get into these things. But I think it's more interesting if you try to just make music and see what happens. You know, like
Oh, no, of course. No,
it's like, I don't want to be promoting people making like what I call IKEA music, just so they could get a little sync on like Selling Sunset or something. Like, you know, it's just not what we should kind of be focusing on.
And you're always focused, like, the problem with that is you're always focusing backwards. Like, you're always looking back instead of looking forward, and that means that whatever you're doing is going to run out of steam anyway. So then, okay, over the record side, from an A&R point of view, like, how does that differ, would you say?
Yeah, so that's very different, but it also has its constraints. But you know, in that, on specifically what we're doing at Big Dada is that we are looking at people who are pushing boundaries and trying to provide them with resources more early on in their career than they would usually get. Like, the artists that we signed to Big Dada probably wouldn't be signed to Ninja Tune yet. Although we also sign like bigger artists too, but it's just like kind of focusing on people who have a really interesting community, have built a fan base around that community, but kind of need help within the realms of like Spotify, press, all these different things that we have our in-house teams for. And then just like people who have a true vision for what they're trying to do, but at the same time, not just like inward, like they're building something outside of themselves with their music and the community that they are a part of. But that can be, that's different than how most indie labels will sign nowadays,
Okay, so let's take that. How would you summarize, without naming names, like how would you summarize indie labels' approach to signing these days?
A lot of it has to do with how much your Spotify numbers. It's very analytics based. I mean, not as much as like major labels. Major labels have like software that follows trending things and your analytics, and they sign that way. But I would say for indie labels, there's still that excitement of just like the music is good. Let's like pursue that. But at the same time, what is their numbers on social media, on Spotify? What is their selling capability for physical? And what is their touring capability? Are they selling out shows? Do they have that fan base where they can go on tour and push the record? How are they doing on radio? How are they doing with press? What have they built on their own already? And can we like maximize on that?
And so you would say that, say, Big Data is more like, like we feel something here, and we feel that irrespective of where the number's at, we can work with the artist to build that together. Is that?
Yeah, and that's only because we're a sub label that we're capable of kind of doing this. I think that sort of method of A&Ring isn't as possible as it used to be, sadly. And we're just in a lucky position where we have the Ninja Tune umbrella to work under, so we can kind of take risks and sign smaller artists. But, we did that with like some artists on our roster that was, it was very beneficial, and that we really helped the artists grow, and now they're a big artist. So it's like, it's still possible, but there's also risks involved that I think a big major indie wouldn't be able to take. And also what you are able to give back is also different than when you're working with small artists, so like smaller advances, smaller marketing budgets, etc. So there has to be a balance, obviously, but the point of Big Data is to kind of try to help and push music in a different way than what is usual.
Like, and is it, how do you see like publishing A&R from that point of view? Are people very focused on metrics in the same way that, so there's song composition is super important from a sync point of view, but do they also look at metrics in the same way? Is there that, because data, quote unquote, seems to be, pressing on everything?
Yeah, definitely data is a big part of it, and history. But on publishing, you can take a bit more risks. You can sign a smaller artist and just like work with them with their catalog and see where it goes, because you're not also putting in marketing budget, you're not putting in physical budget. The costs are less when you sign someone for publishing as opposed to when you sign someone for releasing a record.
Yeah. So the big question, why would anybody sign to a label? This is a loaded question. Why would anybody sign to a label when they could do it all themselves?
I think it's pretty hard to do it all yourself, and still, unless you have like a crazy team that you're paying.
Yeah.
I think also there's that whole thing about labels and music history and just being a part of something bigger than yourself that then ends up helping you grow in a more authentic way, maybe even where it's like you have that support system. You don't feel like you have to participate in certain ways. I don't know, it depends on what kind of label. Again, like it's like sometimes I feel like a small underground like Bandcamp label is more beneficial than working with like a bigger label, because they can add support without maybe making you do certain things that you wouldn't want to do. Because when you sign to a bigger label, you are you need to play the game basically if you want to get the most benefit from signing to a label basically. So I feel like I think there is so much benefit to working with labels because you have these built-in teams that do things like radio, press, marketing, Spotify, digital, and you just have that support system and that history to be a part of. I think that's a really important thing that we forget about nowadays, is that it'd be great to have context. It'd be great to give history, you know, not just releasing things into the vortex.
But that's the reason I asked, because the context and history are the things that a lot of artists lack at the start, especially like when you're talking about Big Data, if you're working with artists really early on. But I think I want to talk about that, like the Bandcamp label thing, like because say for example, signing to a Bandcamp label versus Big Data versus Ninja versus Universal.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a deals on the table with all of them, like I think a lot of artists might think, oh, I go to the biggest is the best, and that Bandcamp angle I think is super interesting. It's like, explain a little more why you think for some artists that would be the right step.
Yeah, I think kind of if you're a new artist and you have all those options, you go with Bandcamp. Actually, you might not get a big advance, but actually you are, you know, from my own music and also working with other artists, I've realized that Bandcamp is kind of the best ecosystem to start growing in. Like for my own stuff, I released a record in 2019 on Bandcamp with this really small underground label, but it was a really well respected label and it had a fan base. So I was like basically unknown before then. I was just more known as a DJ. But through that record, through releasing a record with them, I put out like a critically acclaimed mixtape that Pitchfork covered. Everyone was like aware of, and the tape sold out. Like it was like a kind of like cult thing for that year. And that helped jumpstart my career where I'm able to do so many cool things now. And it was like literally because of that release and releasing it in that way where people were paying attention. So if I had released that maybe on a Ninja Tune, it would be competing with so many other releases that people are paying attention to from Ninja Tune. But this small Bandcamp label that has this cult fan base only release a couple of records a year, people are paying attention to them. And then it just word of mouth organically grows in that way. Someone's like, oh, have you heard this like record that everyone's been talking about? As opposed to when you're working with like a Ninja Tune, it only makes sense when you're already established a bit and have done that kind of DIY route, because then people already have become known of you, but like you're not getting lost basically, like your name is already out there. But if your name is not out there, it makes sense to build slowly instead of going big, because you just get lost if you go big too quickly.
Yeah. How many, this is brilliant. I hope everybody's ready for this. How many years did it take for you to release your first record?
I mean, I started DJing in 2009, and that was kind of my main focus. And I did this thing called Red Bull Music Academy. So that was like back when Red Bull did these amazing camps where you'd go and work with people for like a week or 2 weeks on music. And it was like at Bonnaroo, and going there really helped me feel like I could become a producer. And I just worked with all these other producers and they helped make me feel good about it. So then I was like, okay, I'll actually release music. So it was like 2018 was the Red Bull camp. And then I released my first record in 2019 after this label reached out because he found my stuff on SoundCloud. So I the whole time I'd been just putting stuff up on SoundCloud, but not like pushing it. But then he found it on SoundCloud and was like, let's get this all together and put out a record. But yeah, 10 years since I started.
That's a slow burn. That's a slow burn.
And it was worth
compared to 10 minutes. I've uploaded my music. I've made a track. Yeah.
The right move. I mean, I was putting my music out and sharing it with people and playing it out at shows, but I wasn't like interested in putting it on Spotify or anything like that. And the first record we didn't even have on Spotify. It was just on Bandcamp only for like 2 years, 3 years. And then we finally put it on Spotify. But building that reputation was really important. to be respected for when you do put the music out and people are actually interested in listening to it in an organic way, as opposed to being like, I have no connection to this scene, but you must listen to my music, you know?
So what is the strategy behind not putting, because that sort of seems counterintuitive. Like, why would you not put it on Spotify? Isn't it better to
Well,
let
this was
people?
like 5 years ago. So I
Okay.
feel like it was like a different kind of environment where like Spotify didn't even have playlisting or anything really available for experimental music. Again, this is from the lens of making experimental electronic music.
Yeah.
It just made sense to have it just on Bandcamp. I mean, the label was just very anti-Spotify. Maybe if they weren't so anti-Spotify, we would have just put it up on Spotify just to have it on there because it's a great music discovery tool. But I think it also added a bit of mystery to it, and it resulted in people, you know, even though I had the music for just give what you want, like no set price, people really bought the music and still buying the music. So I think it helped set a precedent that people can buy my music as opposed to just stream it.
And I like, just sort of back to the label thing. I think it's interesting. Like, is it something that I think maybe people don't appreciate is like, say, Ninja is really good at releasing records at a certain level because that's the machine that they've built. Is that not correct? Like that if you're running a marathon, you've got to be ready to get into the process. And sort of, I guess what you're saying is that you need to warm up somewhere and train yourself up and to know the ins and outs of, and to have music that's ready to take advantage of all this amazing experience and the connections they have. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Because Ninja Tune is so good at their album campaigns and they've had crazy successes with just like their teams are just so like, it's like a joy to work with them because they're really on top of it. But I just feel like unless you also have to be on top of it and you also have to have grown to a certain degree in order to be able to take it full advantage of it and have like a true vision. And I feel like artists need that DIY time to really figure out who they are before they get into this system, or they will just like flounder and just like have a hard time mentally with it all too, you know, not just maybe not being able to compete with the landscape, but at the same time also just not being able to stay true to themselves. And the authenticity is what you really want to keep within these things while you are working with these avenues that are hard and harsh and not a good vibe. But, you know, as long as you're true to your vision, those sort of things won't be as impactful when you are in it, you know?
Like another thing we were talking about when we chatted was this sort of, you use the word music ecosystem, which I love because I can't stand music business, even though there is a music business within the music ecosystem. But this idea that everybody's trying to get into the music business, be it as an artist or someone wants to work in it, where you need to be approved to come in through the gate or whatever. Like, but then we also talked about how, like, when I started, it was so pre-internet, you had to get records in a record shops, distributors, and now it's a bit of a free-for-all. Like, and I wonder what your take over, say, the time that you were in university till now. Do you think it's better for artists, or like, is it more accessible, or is it harder because of more releases? And you've got this A&R hat on as well, so you can take it from that perspective. What do you think?
I think it's definitely harder. Like, for example, when I was in college, the whole way that While Nothing became this big band that got signed was that he just sent this demo of him covering Kate Bush into Pitchfork, just like without a PR, just by himself. You know, he just sent it and that blew up. And just getting one write-up on Pitchfork meant that you would get signed to a label I mean, the music was amazing, but it's like you get signed to a label, you're set. And like being signed to label also meant that you were set. And now he has this great, beautiful career that he's built. And just from one Pitchfork write-up, basically. But like nowadays, you get several Pitchfork write-ups and you basically, little drop in the bucket. You get maybe a few people hitting you up and stuff, but it's just not the same impact because you are again competing with so much. It's so oversaturated. But at the same time, like you said, gatekeepers are less. So there's so much opportunity to create your own world and to grow within that. Like I always think people should grow within a niche and then expand. And now that because everyone has access to the same things, they can grow their own thing and build themselves. Either you're building your resume for a job or you're building your music career, but you're really able to, like I said, do it yourself in such a beautiful way that wasn't capable of back in the day. And it's opened up so much room for diversity, for women in music, for so many different types of people. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to exist if it wasn't for this time period. So I'm very thankful for it. And I think some of the best music ever is during this time period. But at the same time, there's so much, like we were talking about, pollution and oversaturation. And I think that comes from, people just feeling like, first of all, they have a computer program that easily can make anything you want, like whatever. You can make music so easily, which is a great thing. But people take advantage of that and just make basic shit and just put it up on all these places and then, spam everyone, spam all the music writers, spam everyone, where at some point everyone's so overwhelmed that they cannot even engage with the good stuff until like it takes 5 years for them to actually finally click that email. So it's like,
and the link's dead. The link's dead after 5 years.
The link's dead. And I just, exactly. And I just feel like it would be so great if everyone could just take a bit more responsibility about how they interact with the music ecosystem, just like how we have been taking responsibility about the environment in general. How are we a more responsible person within this ecosystem as a listener, supporting people through merch, through going to shows, blah, 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 Bandcamp, or someone who is putting out music? Are you adding to it, or are you just, wanting to do something because you want to like go to parties, or you want to do, you just want to be famous basically? And it's like, you can just use TikTok for that. So maybe there's other avenues to satisfy that itch.
But I want to go back. I'm interested by your comment that you said that it's thanks to this time that you've been able to do what you do. Why do you say that?
Well, specifically for my music, I use Ableton, and I do a lot of manipulation of sound in a way that probably I wouldn't, this specific sound that I do, I wouldn't be able to do without the technological advancements we have. And also just the ability that I was able to get like a cracked version of Ableton, a free version of it when I was younger in college from a friend on my laptop that I had. And then you see also this freedom of having access to these computer programs and having like laptops all around the world, where places like Portugal, Mexico, South Africa all have these new genres of electronic music coming out that is due to the fact that these places finally have access to equipment and programs that allow them to do this. So I think that is a big part of it. And then also just there being more room for diversity and just opportunities for us to all create our own zones. Like, I just feel like there wasn't this opportunity. Even when I was growing up, all my guy friends were in bands, but I never thought I could be in a band or have that opportunity. You know what I mean? So just not so much more knowledge is available to us now of like what you can do in the music industry. I didn't know any of these jobs when I first moved to LA about what you could do in music. And I just had to very slowly learn. But now I feel like everyone can learn much quicker. And I think that's really cool.
Like I always talk about, when I started, there was no such thing as a music school, like where you can actually go to school to learn publishing.
Yeah.
And back in the day, it was like, oh my God, like you could never go to school. That would be uncool. Whereas
Yeah.
now, like, there are all these people, I go do talks at schools and everybody knows all this shit that, like, neighboring rights, whatever. Like, I got no idea or whatever. But I think it's interesting, that trade-off. The like, pollution is a very strong word, but it seems to be the correct word in a way. I never thought of it that way. Do you think people are mindful of that at all? Or do you think they're just like, for people listening, I've got my elbows out. Do you think people are just trying to push their way into something because they think they need to be somewhere?
Yeah. And I think that's the whole issue with a lot of the world in general, just like the human mindset of feeling like they need to push themselves into a situation for, like, very kind of superficial personal gain of just like that endorphin rush that we've all been so conditioned to love, from Instagram to different types of social media, of like, yeah, I want to put myself out there. And I think that can be a positive thing. Obviously, I don't want to be negative about it. I just feel like we just need to be a bit more mindful about how we do things in general, like from just our daily actions to how we participate with music and art. And what is music and art to you? What does it represent? Is it just a means to an end, or is it like a true, like, kind of like spiritual communion thing that you're doing,
So, like, let's, instead of thinking about all the pollution, let's talk about, because it's come up in a couple different ways, like in sort of the way you've done things with your own music, and then the way you look at A&R. And it's a big thing that I know when I talk to people who are looking to get into the music business itself or to create music, that it's like, what should I be doing? And I remember when we talked last week, you would like have loads of ideas. And so, like, this idea of, like you were talking about, like creating a world around what you're doing. Like, and I think that also, that kind of conversation is very positive. So, like, how do you look at that when you create your own music and create environment around what you're doing? And then how do you look at that when you're looking from an A&R point of view? Because that must be something you look for, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think, I'm saying all this as of someone who makes their music by themselves in a bedroom. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of my music making process is solitary. But what I try to do in order to make it something beyond myself is, how do I participate in my community? Like putting on shows. I was always putting on shows before COVID, and I still do it every once in a while. Or, I have a radio show, so I try to bring on guests for the radio show, or help other people get radio shows, or just like, try to always have that level of conversation with my community. That is the whole reason why I am where I am. I came to LA not knowing anyone except for my friends who didn't know anyone either, like in terms of like playing shows and stuff. And I just went to shows, met people, sent them my music, but only if it made sense that they were gonna like it, really being intentional in how you move within these spaces, and not taking up people's times just to take up their time. And then once I was, got to a point where I could start supporting people, just having that kind of exchange with them. And I look at that in our artists too. Like, every one of the artists that we signed to Big Dada are also just huge fans of music. And they are just like, at the same time of being an artist, working with other artists, just in terms of just going to other people's shows or just supporting each other in any way that's possible. I think that's so important, and ends up only giving you more support and nourishment to do better for yourself too.
It's funny that you say they like music, like, because that's not, you would think, oh, everybody loves music, but that is certainly not the case. It's not the case. And that's why it's both sad and hilarious at the same time that you say that. So, like, when you're like, you hear about an artist through whatever channel, like, what are the things that really, like, can you think of it? Is it a feeling you get that, oh, like when I check, it's not how many followers they have on Insta, it's just the vibe of the photos, or it's the cover art. Like, are those the things that you start to think, oh, it all, you know, it all comes together in a way? Like, if you're not focused on numbers, and how do you create, what's the emotional connection type thing, do you think?
I guess for me, I use social media a lot to like follow the artists and see what, you know, world they live in, and just kind of, I mean, for me, because I'm an artist, I'm already in all these communities. So it's a really helpful part of incorporating both of these things together. It's like I'm already almost aware of every single artist and what they are a part of, and like the different ecosystems from New York City to LA to London, and how do these all interact with each other. And there's certain players that are, or you know, through their own work, or are in a awareness of, you know, the scene basically. So it's like I'm mostly looking towards those artists, so I already have a good understanding, and this just comes from me being a music nerd, of what the scene is currently, like what is the music landscape currently. So I have that understanding, and I utilize that when I'm looking at those artists. Like, how does this artist compare to this one? And if I get sent an artist from a manager that I haven't heard of within these scenes, I'm like, who is this? Is this just someone who this manager wants to push? But then if I dig a little bit deeper and I see, oh, this person knows this other artist, or this person has played this show with this person, it helps give me context. So I'm not looking at the numbers, I'm looking at the overall context of where these artists stand, and also what their fan base would be. Because that's just a very important part of it that you cannot ignore, is do they have a fan base? Do they have the potential to grow that fan base? And, you know, what are they doing to kind of do that?
So one question about like having those, because this A&R thing, all the labels, managers, understanding where things come from, it helps you structure a lot of information, so a lot of music, so you can put it into categories and know where you're at. Do you think that can create any sort of bias? Like the way you mentioned the manager thing, you're like, oh wait, this manager, I don't know, like I this hasn't come through the normal channels. Do you find yourself having to remind yourself to be open? Do you see what I mean? Like, because normally if you're in a certain scene, or you have that vibe on stuff, you're like, I know what's going on. But do you have to remind yourself, or is it more that you get pleasantly surprised? You realize, oh, I can just check it out and decide, and then.
Yeah, I'm always open, and I like to be kind of, when I get really serious about the A&R, I'll be objective about it and not have my own personal taste involved at all. Because, you know, the starting point is pure and comes from this part of like, oh, I just love the music. But then it goes through me and then the label managers, we discuss, and then we get very nitty gritty about it. And then we have to go to the CEO, and that's where things get even more nitty gritty and more analytical. So it's not like we forego that part of it. It's just that the beginning part of it, the research and the finding part of it, is a bit more pure, so it allows us access to maybe different types of artists that maybe the other labels aren't looking at yet. But then when we get down to the nitty gritty, it's like there's so many artists that I would love to sign, but we're just not gonna sign because they're not at that level yet. Like I'm saying, they need to grow it through these DIY avenues still. Like I'm not just gonna sign a beginning artist just because I like the music, or that they're friends with like the right people or something, but more about just, and I try to, I literally listen to everything, and I, you know, luckily I have, you know, Big Dada as a team. We're all great music lovers. Everyone has different tastes, so we can all kind of really discuss everything deeply together. And that's what I like about the team, is we can be very thoughtful about it, and then we kind of go from there. It's never just like a, oh, this is what I want sort of thing. It has to be objective. It cannot be from my own personal taste, or it would be all like experimental music.
Yeah, and I think also like the thing is that when you're working with a label, you need people to be on your side. And a lot of people get this idea there's an A&R person and they just say what's going to get signed. And But the flip side is that the A&R person needs to, keep the vibe going within the company to help everybody else in the company understand it's taking that context from the artist into the company and then explaining it, and hopefully succeeding in convincing other people that, or giving them an understanding so they can go back out into the world. So does anybody have any questions? Because I think we should probably wind down here. Oh yeah. What makes great songwriters in the label's eye? Streams, followers, numbers. Ooh.
I think, first of all, it is the music. So does it have beautiful melodies? Is it catchy? Is it interesting? And then it's about, is there a fan base? And is there a drive to grow that fan base? What are they doing to grow that fan base? Are they getting support from radio, press, DSP, Spotify, all those things? Like, there is first and foremost the music, but then how are they participating in the industry, and can we grow them?
Oh yeah. So follow-up question. How can a non-performing songwriter grow a fan base?
I think that is just working with the right artists. So finding artists that you are excited about working with, and you build your catalog that way. So it's like, it's talking about someone who's not putting out their own music, but working with other people, right?
Correct. Yes. And then I've got one more question up here. Diksha, hopefully I said your name right. Just a few questions. For signed artists, what are the works needed on a daily basis? Oh my God. I'm assuming they mean Diksha, do you want to clarify your question if you're around? Maybe they, oh, here we go. Diksha, do you want to ask your question verbally, or do you want to
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect. So yeah, I did hear May talk a little bit about, when artists are signed, there are some requirements that are needed from the label side, from the artist on a daily basis to ensure that, they're working towards their music productivity and producing the best music to the best of their ability. So I just wanted to know, what are labels looking for on a daily or a regular basis from artists, or what do they perceive as improvement towards, the end goal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on what part of the album process you are in. Are you in the process of creating the album, or are you in the process of releasing the album? When you're in the process of creating the album, things are a little bit less strict. It depends also on what label you're working with, but for us, we kind of are hands off unless the artist needs help. And that's just about, working with whoever you're working with to create the music, having that the exchange with the label. So sending them demos, taking notes from the label if necessary about the demos, and also, the regular artist stuff like touring, playing shows. I think that's a big important part of it. And then when you're in campaign, that's when things get a little more intense, where we'll require things from you, like doing radio shows, or just like giving, we're putting together the press release. We need you to explain the album to us. We need you to explain the songs. We need you to be down to do interviews, or being interested in maybe creating a single edit for one of your songs so it would fit within the Spotify landscape, so it's not too long of a song because you need it to be short for Spotify. Just like different tasks that are required of you when you're in album campaign, which are usually surrounding press, radio, and how the music is released, and being open to the suggestions from the label, because sometimes it's very different than how the artist envisions releasing the music.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
One other thing I would add is, to make it even more complicated, is it depends what kind of music you make. So you know, if you're making left field electronic music, chances are you're not going to get played on the radio. But if you're making pop hits like your friends are, you're going after radio, and that's a lot of meet and greets, and that's a certain way. And then there are people that stay home and never play live. But then there are other people that make fans and, you know, grow their audience via playing live. And that's another thing, Deeksha, to your question, that it really depends on what kind of music you make and what you're doing as to what might be required of you.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. All right, we should end. One last question, Consuelo.
Hey, sorry, yeah, I'll be quick. Just to
No
say,
problem.
so basically, someone like me who's your typical songwriter who doesn't perform, I'm not working with artists, not because I don't want to, I just don't have anyone to work with. I'm just hiring session musician and guest vocalists, and then I'm putting songs on disco. So what would be really the chance of being found that way, you know, by someone like you, if it's about the song and not the numbers or so much? How can I really find myself working with a label as a songwriter to write for artists?
I think in that case, it would be more about finding, if you're interested in sync, finding a sync agency. So there's agencies that are not like a publishing company or a label, but just people who pitch your music for sync, and then growing your catalog that way. And then people will start reaching out to you. Like it's yeah, finding those avenues of putting your music out, or like looking up who, yeah, the different songwriters or producers that are on these TV shows, like the songs that are on there and who is working on these shows, and then trying to link up with those producers and songwriters. We're also just making music for sync or for other artists and working with them. And then that way you can get, you know, the catalog that you can then take to a publishing company or a label. So it's like, yeah, about finding the people who are already doing it and then trying to connect with them. And so you can start, being able to have your name associated with the people who you want to be doing cool things with.
Yeah, so basically, get some validation before I can get in contact with the publisher to say, can I join the team of writers that writes for your artist? Have I got it right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
All right, brilliant, Consuelo. Thanks for your question. And we better wind down here, May, because I know you've got to go.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. It was nice to chat. And I've purposely held back lots of questions because I was worried if we really got going, we'd be here for hours.
I know. Right?
So,
yeah.
But thanks so much for the chat. I really appreciate it. It was brilliant to talk to you. And
Thanks so much.
thanks to everybody for coming. We'll see you next month. Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.